Hank Dawson hunched over his motorcycle as it rumbled beneath him like something alive and restless. The cold bit through his leather jacket, gnawed at his knuckles, crept into the gaps between his collar and his neck. But he barely noticed. Winter storms in these Montana mountains were nothing new to him. He had been riding through worse for most of his life. The kind of cold that other men avoided, the kind that kept sensible people by their fireplaces, with blankets and hot coffee. That was the cold Hank preferred. It meant the roads would be empty. It meant he would be alone. Snow fell hard now, thick flakes catching in his graying beard and melting against the heat of his engine. The highway stretched before him like a pale scar cutting through the gathering darkness. No headlights, no taillights, nothing but the white blur of falling snow and the low moan of wind through the pines. Just the way he liked it. Just the way it had been for 20 years. Hank squinted against the sting of icy wind. Road signs flashed in the beam of his headlight, their reflective letters catching the light for a brief blazing second before vanishing behind him. Another 30 miles to the next town. He would make it before full dark if he kept this pace. Find some cheap motel on the edge of some forgotten highway town. Pay cash. Sleep for 5 hours. Ride out before dawn. Another nameless stop on a journey that had no destination and no end. His thoughts drifted to Claire, as they always did when the world got quiet around him. His little sister. Little. She had been 10 years old the last time that word truly fit her. But in his mind, she was always small, always looking up at him with those weedy hazel eyes, trusting him to make things right. 10 years since he had seen her face. 10 years of wondering if she was okay, if she was safe, if she was even alive. 10 years of telling himself it was better this way. That a man like him only brought ruin to the people he cared about. That the kindest thing he had ever done for Claire was disappear. "Ain't no good for nobody," he muttered into the wind, his voice swallowed instantly by the storm. The words had become a kind of prayer, a bitter mantra he repeated to keep the guilt at bay. The bike's headlight cut a weak path through the swirling white. Visibility was dropping fast, the snow thickening into a curtain that blurred the line between road and sky. Hank knew he should probably pull over. Even he was not foolish enough to ride blind through a mountain storm at night. But something kept him moving forward. Stubbornness, maybe. Or just the long habit of pushing through when things got hard. Or maybe it was the deeper truth he did not want to face. That stopping meant sitting still. And sitting still meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. His mind drifted back to their last fight. The memory hit him with the force of a fist to the chest, the way it always did. Claire standing in his doorway, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. Not from fear of him, never that. From the effort of holding herself together long enough to say what she had come to say. She had begged him to leave the life he had chosen. To be the brother she remembered from before. Before the club. Before Ridge. Before the darkness swallowed him whole. "You are all I have got, Hank, please." She had called him Hank back then. Not Ridge. Just the name their mother had given him before she died. The name he had buried under leather and tattoos and a reputation that made grown men cross the street. Her words had hit harder than any punch he had ever taken. Harder than the broken bottle in Reno. Harder than the steel-toed boot in that parking lot in Billings. But he had turned her away. Told her some men could not change. Told her she was better off forgetting she had a brother. He had watched her walk away that night, carrying all her hope and disappointment through the rain to her car. She had not looked back. He had stood in the doorway and watched her taillights disappear around the corner, and he had told himself it was the right thing. 10 years. That was what the right thing looked like. A decade of silence where a sister used to be. The bike suddenly slipped on a patch of black ice, the rear tire losing grip and swinging wide. Hank corrected instinctively, his body shifting with the machine muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have been too slow. His heart hammered against his ribs for 3 hard beats, then settled. The storm was getting dangerous now. The wind had shifted, driving the snow sideways in thick, stinging sheets. A small turnout appeared on his right, some kind of scenic overlook, the kind of place where tourists stopped in summer to take photographs of the valley below. Now it was just a patch of cleared ground, surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. Hank guided his motorcycle towards it, the tires crunching through fresh powder. He would wait out the worst of it, let the storm blow itself out, then push on to town. He killed the engine and the sudden silence pressed in around him like a living thing. Nothing but the soft hush of falling snow, the distant moan of wind through the trees, his own breathing ragged and visible in the frozen air. Hank pulled off his helmet and shook out his gray-streaked hair. He was suddenly aware of how tired he felt. Not just road-weary, not just cold, but bone-tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long, from years of running without ever moving forward. Getting old Ridge, he said to himself, using the name his brothers in the club had given him. The name that fit him no better than the life he had been living. Something caught his eye through the curtain of falling snow. A flash of color where there should be none. Bright and sudden like a bird in a gray sky. Hank narrowed his eyes, peering into the gathering darkness beneath a large pine tree about 20 yards from the turnout. There it was again. Something vivid. Something moving. Against every instinct that told him to mind his own business, Hank swung his leg off the bike and started walking. The snow came up past his ankles, soaking through his jeans, filling his boots with wet cold. He barely registered it. His focus narrowed to that spot of color, that small shape taking form as the distance closed between them. As he got closer, the shape became clear, and Hank felt his heart miss its rhythm. A child. A little girl. She sat huddled against the base of the pine tree, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around herself. She wore a bright purple coat, much too thin for this kind of weather, and her small shoulders shook with sobs that made no sound. As if she had been crying so long that the tears kept coming, but the voice had given out. Hank stopped, frozen by something that went deeper than the cold. Everything in his mind screamed at him to turn around, get back on the bike. This was not his problem. He did not get involved in other people's troubles. Not anymore. That was the code he had lived by for years. Keep your head down, keep moving, trust no one but yourself. But he could not move, could not look away from the small figure trembling against the tree. The little girl lifted her head, sensing his presence the way animals sense a change in the weather. Her face was tear-streaked, her cheeks bright red from the cold, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of hope and fear that made Hank's chest ache in a way he had not felt in years. She could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old. In her small hands pressed tight against her chest, she clutched something flat and rectangular. "Hey," Hank called out. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by the cold and years of disuse. "You okay?" He took a cautious step forward. The girl watched him, her eyes tracking every movement. She had not run, had not screamed. She just stared at him with those enormous eyes, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "You lost?" Hank asked, keeping his distance. He was painfully aware of how he must look to a child. A massive man in a leather jacket covered in patches and insignia. A gray beard, scarred hands, tattoos climbing up his neck. He had spent years cultivating a look that made grown men change direction on the sidewalk. The last thing he wanted was to scare this child more than she already was. The girl did not answer. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint that set off alarm bells in Hank's mind. He glanced around. No car tracks. No footprints except his own already filling with fresh snow. Nothing but trees, an empty road, and the growing darkness. Where had she come from? There were no houses for miles, no signs of other travelers, nothing but wilderness. "Where is your mom or dad?" He tried again, crouching down to seem less imposing. The movement sent a bolt of pain through his bad knee, an old souvenir from a bar fight in Bozeman. He ignored it. The little girl's eyes welled with fresh tears. She clutched whatever she was holding, even tighter against her chest, as if it were the only anchor keeping her connected to the world. "Okay," Hank said softly. "It is okay." But it was not. A child alone in a snowstorm was about as far from okay as the world could get. The wind picked up, driving needles of ice against his face and through the fabric of his jacket. The temperature was dropping fast. The kind of fast that meant single digits by midnight. The kind that killed. "Listen," Hank said, moving one careful step closer. "It is not safe out here. We need to get you warm. You understand?" For the first time, the girl's expression changed. Something shifted behind her eyes. She gave a tiny nod, so small he might have imagined it. But he had not. "I am Hank," he said. "What is your name?" Her mouth moved. The sound that came out was so soft it barely made it past her blue-tinged lips. The wind took it before it reached him. What is that? He leaned closer. Rose, she whispered. Okay, Rose. Hank nodded slowly. I have got a motorcycle over there. I can take you someplace warm. Then we will figure out how to find your folks. He reached out his hand and stopped short of touching her. His knuckles were scarred from more fights than he could count. The letters HOLD on his left hand and FAST on his right, faded blue tattoos from a lifetime ago. Rose looked at his outstretched fingers for a long moment. Then she uncurled slightly from her protective ball, revealing just how small she truly was inside that purple coat. A wisp of a child, a feather, a breath. Are you hurt? Hank asked. She shook her head. Can you walk? She nodded and tried to stand. Her legs wobbled stiff from the cold and from sitting too long in the same position. She fell back against the tree trunk with a small whimper that cut through Hank like a blade. He hesitated only a moment. I'm going to pick you up, okay? Just to get you to the bike. Rose did not protest as he gently scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Like holding air, like holding a memory. Her small body trembled against his chest, and he could feel the cold radiating from her clothes. As he lifted her, Hank got his first clear look at what she had been clutching so desperately. A photograph, worn soft at the edges, creased down the middle, like it had been folded and unfolded hundreds of times, handled with the kind of desperate care that belongs to sacred things. What you got there? He asked, trying to keep his voice light as he carried her through the snow toward his motorcycle. Rose did not answer. She just held the photograph tighter, pressing it flat between her small palm and his leather jacket. Hank's mind raced through the possibilities as he walked. Where had she come from? How had she gotten here? Had someone left her? The thought made his jaw clench until his teeth ached. When they reached the bike, he set her down carefully on the seat, keeping one steadying hand on her shoulder. She was dangerously cold. Her small frame shook in waves that seemed to pass through her whole body. Let me see what you have got there, Hank said, nodding toward the photograph. Maybe it will help us figure out where you belong. Rose looked up at him. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that children sometimes have, as if they can see through the surface to whatever truth lies underneath. Then slowly, with visible reluctance, she held out the photograph. Hank took it carefully, brushing away the snowflakes that had settled on its surface. In the fading light, he tilted the photo toward his motorcycle's headlamp. The image came into focus and the world tilted beneath his feet. A younger version of himself stared back from the photograph. The same eyes, the same scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But he was smiling, something he rarely did anymore, and his arm was wrapped around a woman's shoulders. Claire, his sister. They stood in front of a white fence somewhere, laughing at something the camera had caught mid-breath. They looked happy. They looked like people who believed the world was kind. Hank's throat closed up. His hand trembled, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Rose watched him with solemn eyes. Why do you have a photo of me? He asked, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. The question hung in the frozen air between them. Rose's small fingers reached out and touched the edge of the photograph. That is you, she said. Her voice was just barely louder than the whisper of snow falling around them. Yeah. Hank nodded, his eyes locked on the image. That is me, and that is... His voice caught as his finger hovered over Claire's smiling face. That is my sister. The little girl's eyes widened. That is my mommy. The words hit Hank like a sledgehammer to the center of his chest. The air left his lungs in a single violent rush. He stared at Rose, truly seeing her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, the way her lower lip stuck out just slightly when she was scared. Claire's features, unmistakable now that he was looking for them. Your mommy? He repeated the words, feeling strange and impossible in his mouth. Claire is your mother, Rose nodded, a small, solemn movement. Her eyes never left his face. Where is she? Where is Claire? Hank asked, his heart hammered against his ribs so hard he was sure the child could hear it. 10 years without a word, and now this child appears on a frozen mountain road with their photograph. Rose's lower lip trembled. The tears that had dried in the cold now welled again, spilling warm tracks down her frozen cheeks. Mommy went to heaven, she whispered. The world stopped. The wind died. The snow hung suspended in the air. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and Hank felt himself falling, even though his feet had not moved. Claire. Gone. His little sister. The girl who used to follow him everywhere, who looked at him like he hung the moon, who believed even when no one else did that there was something good inside him. Dead, when he managed, the word came out broken, cracked down the middle like the photograph. After the leaves fell, Rose said, her small hands still rested on the photograph. When it got cold, recently then, this fall, a few months ago, Claire had been alive just months ago, close enough to touch if he had known, if he had bothered to look. Hank closed his eyes. Grief and guilt washed over him in equal measure, a tide so powerful it threatened to pull him under. He should have been there, should have known, should have made things right years ago. But he had been too proud, too stubborn, too afraid. I'm sorry, he said, not sure if he was speaking to Rose or to Claire's memory or to the cold and empty sky above them. Rose watched him with that terrible patience that very young children have, the kind of patience that comes from having already learned that the world does not always explain itself. Are you Uncle Hank? The word uncle caught him off guard, a title he had never considered, a role that had never existed in his vocabulary. He was Ridge. He was a patched member. He was the guy you called when things needed to get ugly. He was not anyone's uncle. Yes, he answered. The word felt foreign on his tongue, like speaking a language he had once known but had long forgotten. I am Hank. Your mom was my sister. She had your picture in her special box, Rose said. She looked at it sometimes when she was sad. Hank's throat tightened until he could not swallow. He tried to imagine Claire keeping his photograph all those years, pulling it out on hard nights, looking at the face of the brother who had abandoned her, and still somehow finding comfort in it. The thought hurt worse than anything he had ever endured, worse than bullets, worse than broken bones, worse than the cold that was now seeping into his marrow. Rose, he said carefully, who are you with now? Who is taking care of you? Silence. The girl just stared at him with those two old eyes, saying nothing. Did someone bring you here? Leave you here, Hank pressed, fighting to keep the anger out of his voice. Rose shook her head slightly. Then instead of answering, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Hank with careful, deliberate movements. The gesture of a child who has been told this paper is important. Hank unfolded it with numb fingers. It was a hand-drawn map, worn and creased from handling with a route marked in red pen. His stomach dropped when he recognized the ending point. This very stretch of road, this exact turnout. Rose, Hank said, his voice unsteady. Why are you here? How did you know I would be on this road? Mommy wrote it down, Rose said. She reached into another pocket and produced a second piece of paper, even more worn than the first. In Claire's familiar handwriting were directions and the words, he rides this way every Thursday. Wait, and he will come. Hank's whole body went still. Claire had known his routine, his Thursday ride through the mountains, the one constant he had kept for years. She had been watching him, tracking him from a distance, maybe for months, maybe for years. The thought that she had been so close yet never reached out filled him with a grief so deep it had no bottom. She said you would keep me safe, Rose said simply, looking up at him with absolute trust. That is what Mommy said. Find the man in the picture. He will keep you safe. The weight of those words settled onto Hank's shoulders like a physical thing. His sister had died believing he would protect her daughter after 10 years of silence, after he had walked away and never looked back. Claire had used her last breath of faith on him. He lifted Rose into his arms and wrapped his leather jacket around her small body. It swallowed her whole, making her look like a child wearing a tent. She pressed her face against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat through the leather, quick and light like a bird's. Half a mile down the road, a neon sign glowed through the storm. Lorraine's Diner. Hank had passed it 100 times without stopping. Tonight, the warm yellow windows looked like the gates of salvation. He parked close and carried Rose inside. The bell above the door rang, and the warmth hit them like a wall. Rose relaxed slightly against his chest, her trembling, easing from violent to merely constant. An older waitress with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes went wide at the sight a massive tattooed biker cradling a tiny girl, wrapped in a leather jacket decorated with Hell's Angels patches. Table for two, Hank said. His voice came out gruff. It was the only register he had. The waitress whose name tag read Lorraine recovered quickly. Right this way, honey, she said, leading them to a booth near a heating vent. Nasty night to have a little one out. Hank slid into the booth and Rose slipped from his arms to sit across from him, still swimming in his jacket. In the diner's bright fluorescent light, he could see her more clearly now. Her hair was light brown, pulled into messy pigtails that were coming undone. Her clothes beneath the jacket were clean but worn. And those eyes. Claire's eye exactly. Looking back at him from a face that could not be more than 4 years old. Hot chocolate for the kid, Hank told Lorraine. And whatever soup you have got. Coffee for me, black. Lorraine nodded, her gaze lingering on Rose, with the particular concern of a woman who had raised children of her own. Poor thing looks half frozen. I will have that hot chocolate out in 2 shakes. When she disappeared behind the counter, Hank turned his full attention to Rose. She sat very still, her small hands emerging from the jacket sleeves to rest flat on the table. She had not smiled. Not once. You warm enough? He asked. Rose nodded. Lorraine returned with a steaming mug of hot chocolate piled with whipped cream and a thick ceramic cup of black coffee. Soup is coming right up, she said, setting the drinks down. Anything else I can get for the little one? We are good, Hank said. He pushed the hot chocolate toward Rose. Careful, it is hot. Rose wrapped both hands around the mug, but did not drink. She stared at Hank over the rim, studying him with that unsettling focus. You should take small sips, Hank suggested, feeling completely out of his depth. She took a tiny sip and came away with a whipped cream mustache on her upper lip. She did not notice. So Hank said, clearing his throat, Your mom, she told you to find me. Rose nodded. But how that road tonight? How did you get there? Before she could answer, Lorraine returned with a bowl of chicken noodle soup. Here you go, sweetheart, she said, placing it in front of Rose. She lingered clearly, bursting with questions. Hank gave her a look that had made hardened criminals find somewhere else to be. Lorraine retreated to the counter. You should eat, Hank told Rose. Get something warm inside you. Rose picked up her spoon and began eating with slow, deliberate movements. Each spoonful was careful and precise. She blew on the broth before each sip. She did not slurp. She did not spill. Hank watched her and felt the ache in his chest deepen. Someone had taught this child good manners. Someone had taken the time. Claire. And your mom, Hank said quietly. She was Claire. Claire Dawson. Rose looked up from her soup. Those familiar eyes. Claire's eyes. Yes, she is my mommy, was Hank thought. Was your mommy? But he could not say it. And your dad? He asked, a new edge entering his voice. Rose's face closed like a door slamming shut. She looked down at her bowl and said nothing. Her small shoulders drew inward, making her even smaller inside the oversized jacket. The silence told Hank everything he needed to know. Hank watched Rose eat the rest of her soup in small, precise spoonfuls. Each one measured, each one careful. She ate like someone who had learned that food was not guaranteed, that meals could be interrupted, that the world did not always let you finish what you started. When did your mom tell you to find me? Hank tried again, gently. Rose set her spoon down beside her bowl. The gesture was deliberate, adult in its precision. Before she went to heaven, she said. Her voice was small but matter-of-fact, the way children speak about enormous things. Hank gripped his coffee mug until the ceramic burned his palms. The pain kept him focused. Your mom, she is in heaven now. Rose nodded. The angels came to get her. That is what Pastor William said. Hank swallowed. His throat felt like he had swallowed crushed glass. When did this happen, Rose? After Christmas, she replied, picking her spoon back up. But before my birthday. Hank tried to translate a child's sense of time into something concrete. Was that a long time ago? Or just a little while? The moon was big and round 2 times. Rose made a circle with her small hands. 2 months. Claire had been gone about 2 months. While Hank rode his motorcycle through mountain storms, feeling sorry for himself, his sister had been dying. Had died. Had been buried in some cemetery he did not know the name of, mourned by people he had never met. Were you with her when she... He could not finish. Rose nodded, her eyes cast downward. She was sleeping a lot. Then she would not wake up anymore. She said it simply, but Hank saw the way her small shoulders tensed, the way her fingers tightened on the spoon. She had watched her mother die, 4 years old, and she had watched the light go out of the only person who had ever made her feel safe. I am real sorry about your mom, Hank said. She was my sister. Did you know that Rose nodded again? She said, "You are my Uncle Hank." She showed me the picture lots of times. Her small fingers disappeared inside the jacket sleeve and emerged with the crumpled photograph. She placed it on the table between them and smoothed it carefully with her palm. Hank looked down at his younger self, smiling, something he never did anymore. "Was your mom sick for a long time?" he asked quietly. "She had bad cells," Rose explained with solemn authority. "The doctor gave her medicine, but it made her hair fall out. Then she got too tired to get out of bed. Cancer." Claire had been fighting cancer alone with a 4-year-old daughter while hiding from an abusive man. And Hank had been nowhere, had been nothing, had been less than nothing. "Where have you been staying since your mom—" He still could not say the word. Rose's face clouded. "With Miss Penny. She was Mommy's friend. But then a man came and she got scared and told me to run." Every muscle in Hank's body went rigid. "What man, Rose?" But Rose shook her head and picked up her spoon again, stirring the cooling soup without eating. Her face had closed like a door. "It is okay," Hank said quickly. "You do not have to talk about it." He watched her take one more small bite, then push the bowl away. Lorraine appeared with the check and a concerned look that Hank deflected with a curt nod and a $20 bill that more than covered the meal. Outside, the snow had slowed to gentle flurries. The world was white and silent and still. Hank carried Rose to his motorcycle where the cold had painted the chrome with a thin layer of ice. He realized, standing there with a 4-year-old in his arms and a motorcycle as his only transportation, that he was profoundly unprepared for what was happening to him. But the child needed warmth, needed shelter, needed someone who would not disappear. He wrapped his jacket tighter around her, climbed onto the bike, and rode slowly and carefully through the empty streets, his body shielding her from the wind. After the diner, Hank drove them to his apartment through streets that were slowly being buried under fresh snow. Rose sat in the back seat of a truck he had borrowed from a friend for the winter months, properly buckled in her face pressed against the cold window, watching the streetlights pass like slow-moving stars. The apartment was on the second floor of a building that had seen better decades. One bedroom, a bathroom that leaked, a kitchen that could barely fit one person. The furniture consisted of a couch with a permanent dip in the middle, a television with a cracked screen corner, and a kitchen table with 3 chairs because the fourth had broken years ago and he had never replaced it. "It is not much," Hank said, pushing the door open. "Never really had company before." Rose stepped inside with the careful reverence of a child entering a museum. She looked at the bare walls, the empty surfaces, the complete absence of anything personal. "Your house is empty," she observed. "I do not need much," Hank replied. That night, he gave Rose his bed and took the couch. He helped her brush her teeth with a new toothbrush he found in the bathroom cabinet. He gave her one of his black t-shirts to sleep in, and when she emerged from the bathroom wearing it like a nightgown, the Harley-Davidson logo stretched across her tiny chest, something twisted in his heart. He tucked her in. The bed was enormous around her, a vast landscape of rumpled sheets and flat pillows. She looked lost in it, a small island in a dark sea. "Good night," he said, backing toward the door. "Uncle Hank." He stopped. "Mommy always checked for monsters." Hank blinked. "Monsters under the bed," Rose whispered, "and in the closet." He knelt down and made a show of looking under the bed, sweeping his arm through the darkness. "No monsters here," he reported. Then he walked to the closet and opened both doors wide. "None in here either. All clear." Rose's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Thank you." He stood there feeling like the largest and most useless thing in the room. "Anything else your mom did before bed?" "She sang to me." Rose's voice dropped to almost nothing. "But it is okay if you do not." "I do not know any kid songs," he admitted. "That is okay," Rose said again. She curled onto her side, the photograph pressed flat against her heart. Her eyelids grew heavy. Hank stood and watched until her breathing deepened and her body relaxed into sleep. Even then, her small fist held the picture tight. He sank into the chair in the corner of the room and let the day crash over him. Claire was gone. Morning came gray and cold. Hank had barely slept. He found Rose already awake, sitting on the living room floor with the contents of her small backpack arranged in a careful row. The photograph, a worn teddy bear with one eye missing, a thin blanket with frayed edges, a folded piece of paper. Hank examined each item with the attention of a man reading a map to buried treasure. The paper was a birth certificate. Roseanne Dawson, Mother Claire Jean Dawson, father listed as unknown. Claire had given Rose her maiden name, not the father's name. Hank felt a small pulse of relief at that. Beneath the birth certificate was a small envelope containing a key. The key had a tag attached, and on the tag in Claire's handwriting was an address, 1423 Pinewood Lane Apartment 7B. He spent the morning making calls from a prepaid phone, called his boss at the garage, called a buddy about borrowing a car with less recognizable plates than his truck, called no one else because there was no one else to call. Then he rode his motorcycle across town to a dingy auto repair shop with a faded sign that read Marsh Motors. The place was not officially open yet, but Hank knew Bobby would be there. The man practically lived in his garage, had for 30 years. A bell jangled as Hank pushed through the door. The familiar smell of motor oil cigarettes and old coffee hit him like a time machine. "We are closed," called a gruff voice from the back. "It is Ridge," Hank called back. A stocky man with graying hair and a thick walrus mustache appeared from behind a half-disassembled engine block. His eyebrows shot up. Bobby Marsh wiped his hands on a rag that was dirtier than his hands and grinned. "Well, I will be damned. Thought you might be dead by now," Bobby said, though his eyes showed genuine pleasure at seeing an old friend. "Not yet," Hank replied, forcing a tight smile. Bobby led him to the cluttered back office and poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the previous decade. The room was papered with R magazines and framed photographs of classic motorcycles and old racing posters. It smelled like history and engine grease. "So what brings the famous Ridge crawling out of his hole at the crack of dawn?" Bobby asked, settling into his creaky desk chair. "Must be important." Hank wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I need information about my sister." Bobby's casual expression faded. "Claire, have not heard that name in a long time." "She is dead," Hank said. The words still felt impossible, like trying to say something in a language that had no word for what he meant. "Cancer. Her daughter found me yesterday." Daughter? Bobby looked genuinely surprised. "Did not know Claire had a kid." "That is just it." Hank leaned forward. "I do not know anything about her life these past 10 years. Where she lived. What happened to her? Nothing." Bobby scratched his chin, his thick fingers leaving a smudge of grease on his jaw. "She came by here once, maybe 6 years back. Looking for you. Actually scared. Would not tell me why. Just wanted to know if I had seen you. And you told her what truth? That you had gone nomad, that nobody knew where you were half the time." Bobby shrugged. "She seemed afraid, Ridge, not of me, of something else, something she would not name." Hank felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Did she say anything about a father? A man she was with?" Bobby's eyes narrowed. "She did not mention a kid then, but she talked about some guy, Garrett something. Nolan, I think, said he was bad news." Bad? How Bobby leaned back his chair, protesting. "The controlling kind. The kind that leaves marks where no one can see them." His voice went grim. "I offered to have some of the boys pay him a visit. Claire would not hear of it, said it would only make things worse." Hank's hands tightened on the mug. "Any idea where I can find this Garrett? Last I heard, he was running a construction company out of Millbrook. Real charmer on the surface." Bobby studied Hank's face carefully. "There is something else you should know. Had a guy in here about a week ago asking about Claire. Described her perfectly. Said he was looking for an old friend. And what did you tell him? Nothing. Said I did not know her." Bobby opened a drawer and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the desk. But he was not buying it. "Left this in case I remembered anything." Hank picked up the card. "Garrett Nolan, private investigator." A phone number beneath. "He is looking for her," Hank said quietly. "Or for the kid." Bobby nodded slowly. "And he is not the type to give up easy. Word is the man has a temper that would make you look like a saint." "Thanks, Bobby." Hank pocketed the card and stood. "What are you going to do?" Bobby asked, concern heavy in his voice. Hank headed for the door. "Whatever I have to." By noon, they were on the road. Pinewood Lane was in Oak Ridge, about an hour's drive east. The apartment complex was modest but clean, with flower beds lining the walkways and curtains in most windows. It looked like the kind of place where normal people live normal lives. An elderly woman was walking a small white dog near the entrance. She eyed Hank with the wariness he was used to, but when her gaze dropped to Rose, her entire expression transformed. "Oh my goodness," the woman said. Is that little Rose Claire's girl? Hank tensed. You knew Claire? The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield from apartment 6B. She had watched Rose sometimes when Claire worked late. She had baked cookies. She had been a neighbor and a friend. When Hank told her Claire had passed, Mrs. Whitfield's hand went to her heart and stayed there. She led them inside, fed Rose chocolate chip cookies, and then pulled Hank aside while the child was distracted. Your sister was scared of someone, Mrs. Whitfield said, her voice low and urgent. She never said the name, but I could tell. She checked the locks twice every night. She jumped when someone knocked. She moved 3 times in the 2 years I knew her. Always suddenly, always in the middle of the night. There was a man, Hank said. Mrs. Whitfield nodded. He came looking for her once. Charming on the surface. Brought flowers. But something about him felt wrong. When I told Claire, she was terrified. That is when she started planning to leave again. She packed up in the middle of the night. Mrs. Whitfield continued. I heard them going and came to say goodbye. She told me if anyone came asking about her, I should say I knew nothing. She was genuinely afraid. Hank looked through the doorway at Rose, who sat by a window watching birds' cookie crumbs on her shirt, perfectly still and perfectly trusting. The danger was real. Whatever it was, Mrs. Whitfield said quietly, following his gaze, it was real enough to make your sister run for a very long time. From Oak Ridge, Hank drove to a small white church on the outskirts of town. St. Matthew's, with its simple steeple and modest clapboard walls. Rose recognized it immediately. Pastor William gives good hugs, she said. And they have cookies after. Inside, a man in his 60s stood at the altar arranging hymnals. He looked up when they entered, and when he saw Rose, his face cycled through surprise, relief, and deep concern in the space of a single breath. Good heavens. Little Rose. Pastor William Hayes had known Claire for nearly 2 years. She had come to his church seeking shelter through a program for women escaping domestic violence. She had been brave. She had been afraid, too. She had been both of those things at the same time every single day. She never blamed you for the distance between you, Pastor Hayes told Hank in his small office, while Rose ate cookies with the Sunday school teacher down the hall. She spoke of you often, said you were strong and stubborn, that you had a good heart beneath everything else. Hank looked at his scarred hands. She was wrong about that. I do not think so, the pastor said quietly. She knew you better than you know yourself. He reached into his desk and produced a small, worn Bible. She left this last time she was here. I have been keeping it. Hank turned the Bible over in his hands. It felt foreign, out of place in his grip. There is something else you should know, Pastor Hayes said. Whenever Claire spoke of her fears of the things she had endured, she always ended with the same thought. She believed that someday when things were at their darkest, you would come. She had absolute faith that her brother would save her when she needed him most. Hank stared at the Bible. His throat burned. She was wrong, he said. I came too late. That night, back in his apartment, with Rose asleep on the couch and the world quiet around him, Hank sat at the kitchen table and turned the photograph over in his hands. He had been staring at it all day. At his own younger face. At Claire's smile. At the life they had shared before everything went wrong. The back of the photograph was blank except for a faint yellowish discoloration around the edges. He ran his finger across the surface. There was something there, almost invisible. Slight indentations in the paper. A memory surfaced, something from childhood, a trick he and Claire had invented to pass secret messages. Their father had been a hard man, always checking their notes, their bags, their pockets. So they had developed their own method. Lemon juice. Write with it, and the words are invisible. Hold the paper near heat, and the letters appear. No way, Hank murmured. He found a book of matches in a kitchen drawer. He struck one and held the flame carefully beneath the photograph, moving it slowly so the paper would not burn. Letters began to appear, faint brown script materializing like ghosts on the white surface. Claire's handwriting, small and precise. Hank, if you are reading this, I could not keep her safe anymore. I have always watched you from afar. You think you are lost to darkness, but I have seen your light. The men who follow you would die for you. That is not fear. That is love. You have strength no one else has. Not just to fight, but to protect. You are the only one I trust with her. She needs a guardian, not just a parent. I believe in who you are, not what you have done. Remember the promise we made as children. It is time. Love always. Claire. Hank read the message 3 times. His vision blurred so badly by the second reading that he had to blink hard and start again. By the third, he was not reading so much as absorbing the words through his skin, letting them seep into the marrow of his bones. The promise they had made as children, whispered in the dark of their shared bedroom while their father raged downstairs. A vow that was simpler and more sacred than any oath he had ever taken with the club. I will always protect you, no matter what. He looked at Rose sleeping peacefully on his couch, her small chest rising and falling, the photograph still clutched in her tiny fist pressed against her heart, even in sleep. Claire had been watching him all these years. She had seen past the leather and the tattoos and the violence. She had seen through Ridge all the way down to Hank, to the boy who had once promised his little sister that no one would ever hurt her. She had trusted him with the most precious thing in her life. Not despite what he had become, but because she believed there was still something good beneath it all. I will not let you down, Hank whispered to the dark apartment. The words were both a prayer and a vow. Not this time. Something shifted inside him. Something old and neglected stirring back to life in the deepest part of his chest. Not the rage he had carried for decades, not the cold emptiness that had filled him since he left Claire standing in the rain. Something else. Something that felt like purpose, like a reason to exist beyond mere survival. Claire had seen it, had believed in it, had staked her daughter's life on it. Now Hank had to become worthy of that belief. He tucked the photograph back into his wallet and moved to stand over Rose. Gently, carefully, he pulled the blanket up around her small shoulders. She stirred, but did not wake. Whatever it takes, he whispered. However long it takes. I'm going to be someone you can count on. Someone worthy of what your mom saw in me. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The sky was clearing, and through the gaps in the clouds, stars appeared. Cold and distant and eternal. The same stars that had watched over him and Claire when they were children, making promises in the dark. Hank sat in the chair by the window and watched Rose sleep, and for the first time in 10 years, he did not reach for a beer, did not think about the road, did not plan his escape. He just sat and breathed, and began slowly to believe that maybe his sister had been right about him after all. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the apartment floor. Hank had not slept more than an hour. He had spent the night in the armchair by the window, listening for any sound from the couch where Rose lay curled beneath a blanket and thinking about Claire, about the years he had wasted, about the man he needed to become. Rose stirred just after 7, sitting up slowly with her hair tangled and her eyes blinking against the light. She looked at Hank with that serious expression that seemed permanently etched on her small face. Morning, kiddo, Hank said. His voice was rough with fatigue, but softer than it had been in years. You hungry? Rose nodded. Can we have pancakes? Something about the request, so simple and so childlike, made Hank's chest tighten. He stood and moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets and searching through his meager supplies. He found flour, eggs, milk that was still a day from expiring. No blueberries, plain ones today, he said. We will get blueberries next time. Okay, Rose said softly. She climbed down from the couch and padded to the kitchen table in her bare feet, the oversized t-shirt hanging past her knees. She watched him with careful attention as he mixed the batter, her chin resting on her folded arms. Mommy made them with blueberries, she offered. Hank poured batter onto the hot pan and watched it bubble. I bet she did. They ate together in silence that was not uncomfortable, but rather the kind that belongs to two people still learning each other's rhythms. Rose ate with the same careful precision she had shown at the diner. Small bites, no mess. When she finished, she looked at her empty plate and then at Hank. Can we come back to this table tomorrow? The question was so unexpected and so revealing that Hank had to set down his coffee cup. She was asking if she would still be here tomorrow, if this was permanent or just another stop on the endless journey her short life had been. You can come back to this table every morning, Hank said, for as long as you want. Rose's face did not change, but something behind her eyes settled, like a stone finding the bottom of a river. After breakfast, Hank faced a problem. He needed to visit the county social services office, where Claire had reportedly received help. The questions he needed to ask were not for a child's ears. He knocked on the door of Mrs. Dorothy Brennan across the hall, an elderly widow in her 70s who kept a tidy apartment and had grandchildren's toys stacked neatly in a corner. Mrs. Brennan studied Hank's face, then looked down at Rose, and whatever she saw in the child's eyes was enough to override whatever reservations she had about the tattooed biker asking for a favor. "Does she like cookies, dear?" Mrs. Brennan asked. Rose nodded shyly. "Come on in, sweetheart. I just made some yesterday." The county social services building was a gray institutional box with fluorescent lighting that made everyone inside it look like they had not slept in a week. Hank found the office of Sandra Collins on the third floor. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she had long ago stopped being surprised by anything. "I am Hank Dawson," Hank said. "Claire Dawson's brother." Sandra's expression shifted. Recognition followed by caution. "Please come in and close the door." What she told him over the next hour changed everything. Claire had come to this office 3 years ago, seeking emergency assistance and protection. She had been fleeing a man named Garrett Nolan. The relationship had been violent from the beginning, Sandra explained, but it had escalated dramatically after Rose was born. Claire had a restraining order, but Garrett had ignored it repeatedly. She had moved 6 times in 3 years, changing her phone number each time, living in a state of constant vigilance. "What kind of man is he?" Hank asked, though every instinct already told him the answer. Sandra met his eyes directly. "Dangerous, controlling, violent when crossed. He has assault charges on his record, but has managed to avoid serious jail time. Connections to people who help him stay clean on paper." Then she told Hank something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "He is not just violent," Sandra said, lowering her voice. "He is involved in financial crimes, money laundering through a construction company." Claire knew about it. She told me once that Garrett was more afraid of what she knew than he was angry about her leaving. He wants Rose because he believes Claire may have left evidence with the child. Documents, records, things that could put him in prison. Hank felt cold certainty settle into his bones. This was not just an abusive father trying to reclaim a daughter. This was a criminal protecting his secrets. "Does he know about me? That Claire had a brother?" Sandra shook her head. "I do not think so." Claire was extremely protective of her connections. She rarely mentioned family. She paused. "Except to say that if anything happened to her, Rose should go to her brother. She listed you as the designated guardian in her emergency plan." She turned a document toward him. There it was in Claire's neat handwriting. His name, his description. "Chosen, Mr. Dawson," Sandra said quietly. "Garrett showed up here 2 days ago demanding information about Claire and the child. Said he had parental rights. We did not tell him anything. Security escorted him out, but he will not stop looking. Men like him never do." Hank returned to his apartment with the weight of a mountain on his shoulders. Mrs. Brennan had braided Rose's hair and fed her lunch. The child looked content, almost happy, and the sight of her sitting on the floor drawing with crayons made something ache behind Hank's ribs. He sat down at the kitchen table and spread out everything he had gathered. The business card Bobby had given him, notes from Sandra Collins, Claire's notebook of documented abuse, the key to the Pinewood Lane apartment, the birth certificate listing the father as unknown. He studied it all like a man reading a war map, because that was what this was, a war, quiet and invisible, and fought in courtrooms and hallways, and the dark spaces between what was legal and what was just. That evening, Hank made dinner, tomato soup from a can and grilled cheese sandwiches. The can opener fought him. The bread burned on the first attempt. The cheese slid off the sandwich and melted onto the pan in a sizzling orange puddle. "You are doing it wrong," Rose said from her perch on a kitchen chair, legs swinging. Her voice was soft but certain. "Oh yeah, you are the cooking expert now Mommy showed me. You have to hold it tighter." He adjusted his grip and the opener finally caught. The second batch of sandwiches came out golden. He cut them into triangles the way Claire probably would have and set them in front of Rose with a bowl of soup. They ate facing each other across the small table. The silence between them was different now. Less the silence of strangers and more the quiet of two people learning each other's rhythms. Hank watched Rose blow on each spoonful of soup before sipping. So careful, so precise. "Was your mom a good cook?" he asked. Rose nodded. "She made cookies and spaghetti and pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse pancakes." The image was so vivid and so impossible that Hank had to look away for a moment. The Claire he remembered had been a teenage girl with a rebellious streak and combat boots. Not a mother standing at a stove making Disney pancakes for her daughter. Did she talk about me? The question had been burning inside him all day. Rose studied him with those solemn eyes. She had your picture by her bed. She said you were her big brother and you were very strong. She took another bite of her sandwich. She said you were far away because you had important things to do. Important things, like riding with a motorcycle gang, like fighting in bar parking lots, like drowning whatever remained of his conscience in cheap whiskey. Some important things, Hank muttered. I should have been there, he said more to himself than to Rose. Rose tilted her head and looked at him with that expression that children sometimes have, the one that makes you feel like they can see straight through every wall you have ever built. But you are here now, she said. The words landed like a hammer on glass. Simple, true, devastating. After dinner, Hank washed the dishes while Rose dried her small hands on a towel that hung past her knees. She yawned, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Bedtime, Hank said. Can I have a story? I do not have any kid books. Mommy made up stories. I am not good at that kind of thing, kid. Rose's face fell, and Hank felt like he had stomped on a flower. He sighed. But I guess I could try. Her face brightened immediately, and the speed of the transition from disappointment to hope made Hank realize how accustomed she was to small disappointments and how little it took to lift her out of them. He helped her change into the new pajamas they had bought that afternoon, blue ones with silver stars, and tucked her into his bed. She looked impossibly small against the dark sheets and pillows, a tiny island in an ocean of unfamiliar fabric. Once upon a time, Hank began sitting awkwardly on the edge of the mattress. There was a brave night. Was she pretty? Rose asked. Sure, she was pretty and smart and the bravest person in the whole kingdom. Like Mommy, Rose murmured, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Yeah, Hank said softly, like your mom. He stumbled through a story about a knight saving a village from a dragon, inventing details on the fly, getting lost in his own plot twice, and finishing with the only ending he knew. And everyone lived happily ever after. Good story, Rose said through a yawn. Her eyes closed then fluttered open one more time. Good night, Uncle Hank. Uncle Hank, not just Hank, not just the man in the photograph. Uncle. Family. Something warm and unfamiliar spread through his chest like a flame catching in dry timber. Good night, Rose, he whispered. The next morning, Hank woke to find Rose already up, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully sorting through her backpack. The photograph was in its usual place, tucked in the side pocket. The teddy bear sat at attention beside her. The blanket was folded in a precise rectangle. After breakfast, Hank faced his next move. He needed information about Claire's legal situation, about Garrett's rights, about where Hank stood in the eyes of the law. He knocked on Mrs. Brennan's door again. The old woman looked less surprised this time. Come on in, sweetheart, she said to Rose. I saved you the last 2 cookies from yesterday. Hank drove back to the social services building. He had called Sandra Collins the night before asking for a follow-up. There were questions he had not thought to ask during the first visit. Questions that had come to him in the dark, sitting in his armchair while Rose slept. Sandra had new information ready. She had pulled court records, cross-referenced police reports from 3 counties, and spoken with a colleague at the state attorney's office. The picture is worse than I initially thought, Sandra said. Garrett has been escalating. 2 weeks ago, he hired a private investigator to track down Claire's last known associates. He is working through everyone she ever knew, checking every address, every connection. It is systematic and relentless. And he came here, Hank said. Sandra nodded. He was calm, polished, presented himself as a grieving father. But our security flagged his behavior. He was photographing the building layout, noting camera positions. This is not a man acting on emotion. He is planning. Hank felt the cold settle deeper. How much time do we have? Sandra met his eyes. I would not count on much. She slid a document across her desk. I expedited your sister's guardianship paperwork. But legal proceedings take time, and Garrett has lawyers who will challenge everything. He drove back to the apartment in silence, his mind cataloging threats and options. After picking up Rose from Mrs. Brennan's, he made a decision. The child needed normalcy, needed to feel like a kid, even for an afternoon. That afternoon, he took Rose to the park. It was a small playground a few blocks from the apartment. Swings, a slide, monkey bars. At this hour on a weekday, it was empty. Rose approached the equipment with hesitation, at first looking back at Hank for permission before touching anything. Go ahead, he told her. I will be right here. She started with the swings, climbed on carefully, her feet dangling above the ground. Can you push me? Hank walked over and gave the swing a gentle push. She swung forward and came back. He pushed again. Higher, she called, and there was a note of excitement in her voice that he had not heard before. He pushed harder, carefully, watching her arc through the air, her hair flying behind her. And then he heard it. Laughter, clear and bright and completely unexpected. The sound of a child discovering joy. Rose was laughing, her face transformed, her eyes wide with delight. Look at me, she called. I see you, Hank answered. Something warm expanded in his chest. Something that had been cold and tight for so long, he had forgotten it was there. For the next hour, he watched her play. She conquered the slide. She climbed the rope ladder and waved from the top like a mountaineer claiming a summit. She hung from the monkey bars and swung her legs. And through all of it, she kept looking back at him to make sure he was still there, still watching, still present. Hank sat on a bench and let himself imagine something he had never imagined before. A future that was not just a repetition of the past, mornings with pancakes, weekends at this park, teaching Rose to ride a bike, helping her with homework at a kitchen table that had all four chairs. Can we come back tomorrow? Rose asked, breathless and flushed, running up to him with that rare smile still on her face. Yeah, Hank said, we can come back tomorrow. That was when he noticed them. Two men near the park entrance, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. They were not dressed like parents or dog walkers. One wore a dark jacket with the collar turned up. The other leaned against the trunk, checking his phone, but glancing up too often in their direction. Hank's instincts, honed by 20 years of living among dangerous men, screamed a warning so loud it drowned out every other thought. Rose, he called, keeping his voice casual. Time to go, kiddo. Already Rose's face fell. Yeah, we need to grab some groceries before we head home. He took her hand and steered them toward the side exit away from the men. His pace was quick, but not panicked. He invented a game called Quick Steps to keep Rose moving. She giggled and took exaggerated strides that made her wobble. At the truck, Hank buckled her in with fast, efficient movements. In the rearview mirror, he saw the men emerge from the park. One was talking on a phone, the other took a photograph of his license plate. Hank drove a circuitous route home, making random turns, doubling back, watching for tails. Back at the apartment, he locked every lock, drew every blind, and spent the evening preparing a simple dinner with one eye on the windows. Rose sensed his tension. Why are we being so quiet, she whispered. Just tired, Hank lied. After putting Rose to bed with a clumsy story about a brave knight, Hank sat in the darkened living room with a baseball bat beside his chair. His old handgun rested in his waistband. The weight of it was both familiar and repulsive. The knock came just after midnight, soft, confident, the knock of a man who knew exactly where he was and was not worried about being discovered. Hank went to the peephole. The man in the hallway was clean-cut, well-dressed. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and meant none of it. His eyes were flat and calculating, like a card player who already knew every hand at the table. I know you are in there, the man said through the door. His voice was smooth and practiced. Open up. Let us talk like adults. A pause. I am Garrett Nolan, and I believe you have something that belongs to me. Hank opened the door with the chain still fastened. Through the narrow gap, he faced the man who had terrorized his sister. Garrett Nolan looked nothing like a monster. That was what made him dangerous. He wore an expensive coat over a pressed shirt. His hair was neat. His smile was warm. He looked like a man you would trust to sell you a house or coach your son's baseball team. But Hank had spent decades in the company of killers and thieves. He recognized the cold calculation behind those pleasant eyes. The predator wearing the skin of civility. What do you want, Hank asked. Garrett smiled wider. I think you know. My daughter. I have been looking everywhere for her since her mother passed. You can imagine my concern, Funny Hank said. From what I hear, you were not too concerned before Claire died. The smile flickered. Family matters can be complicated. I do not expect a man like you to understand. Rose needs safety, Hank said. She needs her father. She needs someone who will not hurt her. Garrett's pleasant mask slipped for one revealing second. Then it was back smoother than before. You do not know the first thing about me or my relationship with my family. You are a biker with a criminal record. What are you, her uncle, the one Claire used to worry about, the dangerous one? The words were calculated to wound, and they found their target. But Hank held steady. I am the one she trusted with her daughter. Garrett leaned closer to the gap in the door. His voice dropped. That is not how the courts will see it. What happens when I report that my daughter was taken by a Hell's Angel? A quick search of your name pulls up assault charges, weapons suspicions, known gang affiliations. He paused for effect. By tomorrow afternoon, there will be an Amber Alert with your name and description. Every cop in the state will be looking for you, and when they find you, they will find her, and they will give her to me. You are threatening the wrong person, Hank growled. No, I'm threatening exactly the right person, because you care about her, and that is your weakness. Every muscle in Hank's body tensed. The old violence surged through him like electricity, hot and familiar. He could end this now. One motion, break the chain, put his hands on this man, and make the threat disappear permanently. He had done worse for lesser reasons. But then from down the hallway, a small sound, Rose stirring in her sleep, a murmur of something dreamed, and Claire's words blazed through his mind like fire. Protection, not violence. Hank's hand froze on the chain. Garrett noticed the hesitation and smiled. Smart man. Think about it overnight. I will be in touch tomorrow. And Hank, do not try running. I found you once. He turned and walked calmly down the hallway, his footsteps fading on the stairs. Hank closed the door and pressed his forehead against the cold wood. His whole body trembled with rage and fear. Not for himself. He had not been afraid for himself in 20 years. But for Rose. The morning after Garrett's visit, Hank made breakfast with forced normalcy. Eggs in the only pan he owned. Toast with butter. Coffee strong enough to strip paint. Rose sat at the table coloring with crayons he had bought her, unaware that the world had shifted during the night. She hummed softly as she worked a melody that might have been something Claire once sang. You want toast? Hank asked over his shoulder. With butter, please. He watched her draw while they ate. Her concentration was absolute, her small tongue poking between her lips as she worked. When she finished, she held up the picture. Two stick figures holding hands. A big one with a square body and a small one with a triangle dress. That is us, she said. Hank took the drawing and studied it. The big figure had a beard drawn with scribbled lines. The small one had yellow hair and a wide smile. He tucked it into his pocket without a word. They needed to leave. That much was clear. Garrett knew where they were. By noon, Hank planned to have them on the road. He had made calls during the night. A friend in another state, a place to lie low. But the morning came apart before he could execute the plan. The knock at the door was early, 7:15. A voice called through the wood. Maintenance, water leak from the apartment below. Hank's instincts fired, too early. Wrong voice. He moved to the peephole and saw a man in coveralls with a cap pulled low. Not a good time, Hank called. Come back later. Sir, if there is a leak, the damage could spread. Building manager wants it checked immediately. Leave the toolbox. I will check it myself. Silence. Then have it your way. Footsteps retreated. Hank turned back toward the kitchen. The window exploded. Glass sprayed across the floor in a shower of glittering fragments. A figure lunged through the frame fast and practiced, and before Hank could reach for anything, a jolt of electricity hit him square in the chest. The taser locked his muscles into rigid agony. His body seized and he went down hard, crashing against the kitchen floor, unable to control his limbs, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but stare at the ceiling through a haze of white-hot pain. Through the blur, he saw Garrett step carefully through the broken window, brushing glass from his sleeves with the casual precision of a man who had done this before. Rose, sweetheart, Garrett called. His voice was smooth and warm and utterly wrong. Time to go with Daddy. Hank fought against the paralysis. His fingers scraped the floor. His arms shook. Every nerve in his body screamed. Run, he gasped. Run, Rose. But Rose sat frozen in her chair, eyes enormous, face white with terror. She was 4 years old. She did not know how to run from this. She did not know how to process the sight of the only safe person in her world convulsing on the floor. Do not be scared, Princess Garrett said, moving toward her. This man took you away from me. I have been looking everywhere for you. Hank lunged forward on his hands and knees, grabbed at Garrett's ankle. Garrett kicked hard. His shoe connected with Hank's temple with a sound like a stone dropped in mud. Stars exploded across Hank's vision. Blood streamed from the gishemade above his eye. Uncle Hank Rose screamed. The sound of her voice, terrified and desperate, cut through his consciousness like a razor. Garrett caught Rose easily lifting her thrashing body with one arm. She kicked. She screamed. She reached back toward Hank with both hands, her fingers stretching toward the man on the floor who was supposed to keep her safe. Let her go. Hank growled, staggering upright. Blood poured into his left eye. The second hit came from behind. The man from the hallway, the fake maintenance worker, had come through the front door. Something hard and metallic crashed against the back of Hank's skull. He felt himself falling. The world tilted sideways and went dark at the edges. Through the narrowing tunnel of his consciousness, he heard Rose's voice, small and breaking. Uncle Hank, help me. Then the darkness closed completely. He came to with a jolt. Pain was the first thing. His head pounded with a deep, nauseating throb that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Dried blood caked the side of his face, pulling at his skin when he moved. The apartment was silent except for the drip of the kitchen faucet and the hiss of wind through the shattered window. Glass glittered across the floor like scattered diamonds, catching the late morning light. Rose was gone. The two words hit him before his body fully registered the pain. Rose was gone. The apartment was empty. The chair where she had been sitting was pushed back from the table at an angle. One of her crayons lay on the floor, purple rolled against the baseboard. Hank pushed himself off the floor, fighting waves of dizziness that nearly pulled him back down. His arms shook. His vision doubled and slowly merged. How long had he been out? The light through the broken window had changed. The angle was different. Hours. Precious hours lost while Garrett took Rose farther away with every passing minute. He stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. The mirror showed a stranger staring back. Bloodshot eyes, a deep gash on his temple crusted with dried blood. An expression not of anger but of something worse. Devastation. The face of a man who had been entrusted with the only thing that mattered and had let it slip through his scarred fingers. Back in the kitchen, the eggs he had been cooking were burned to carbon in the pan. The toast sat cold and stiff in the toaster. Rose's hot chocolate from the morning before still sat on the counter where he had left it, a brown ring drying around the inside of the mug. His gaze fell on the small table where Rose had been sitting when the world broke apart. Her drawing lay there abandoned. Two stick figures holding hands. A big one with a scribbled beard and broad shoulders. A small one in a purple dress with a wide smile. She had drawn rays of yellow coming from the sun above them, like the whole sky was celebrating the fact that they were together. Hank picked it up with fingers that would not stop trembling. On the floor nearby lay the photograph. The sacred thing. The talisman. The one Rose had carried through a snowstorm and across mountains to find him. The one she pressed against her heart every night when she fell asleep. It must have fallen from her pocket when Garrett grabbed her. She would be looking for it now. Reaching for it in the dark and finding nothing. Hank lifted the photograph and held it against his chest the way Rose always did, and for a long moment he could not breathe. I am sorry, Claire, he whispered to the empty room. I could not protect her. He sank into the chair where Rose had been sitting just hours before. Her warmth was long gone from the seat. The silence was immense and terrible, the kind that fills a room after catastrophe when the screaming has stopped, but the air still vibrates with its echo. For years, Hank had lived by a code of violence. The Hells Angels had taught him how to hurt people, how to instill fear, how to make threats disappear through force. He had walked away from that life bit by bit, but the skills and the instincts had never fully left. They lived in his muscles, in the way his hands curled when he was angry, in the cold calculation that took over when survival demanded it. Now sitting in his wrecked apartment, with Rose's terrified screams still ringing in his ears, the old way called to him, loud and clear and certain as a siren. I should have killed him the moment I saw him, Hank muttered, his jaw clenched until his teeth ached. I hesitated. I tried to be something I am not. And now she is gone. The hesitation had cost him everything. If he had been the man he used to be, ruthless and violent, and feared, Garrett would never have left this apartment alive. Rose would still be sitting at this table. The crayons would still be in her hands instead of scattered across the floor. He stood slowly, crossed to the hallway closet. Behind his regular clothes hung the leather vest he had not worn in months. He pulled it out and ran his fingers over the patches and insignia, the emblem of one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in the country. He slid it on, and the familiar weight settled onto his shoulders like the armor of a past life. Then he knelt beside his bed and pulled out a metal lockbox. The key had hung on a chain around his neck for years. Some habits outlast the reasons for them. He unlocked it and stared at the contents. A handgun, 2 full magazines. "I am sorry, Claire," he whispered for the third time, "but I do not know any other way." He loaded the gun with the practiced ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times. Checked the chamber, felt the mechanism click, tucked the weapon into his waistband, and felt the cold metal press against his lower back like a familiar hand. The man who had made pancakes, the man who had checked for monsters under the bed, the man who had told a clumsy bedtime story and whispered goodnight to a sleeping child. That man was fading. In his place stood something older, harder, colder, something that had been waiting just beneath the surface all along. Hank sat in his truck on a cliff overlooking the valley. The engine was off. The afternoon sun slanted through the windshield. The gun lay in his lap, heavy and dark. He pulled out the photograph and turned it over. Claire's message was there, faint but legible, the lemon juice letters that had appeared under heat. He read the words again, slowly this time, letting each one sink in. "You have strength no one else has. Not just to fight, but to protect. Protection, not violence. I believe in who you are, not what you have done." Then he pulled out Rose's drawing, the 2 stick figures, the big one with the scribbled beard, the little one with the wide smile. She had drawn them holding hands. She had drawn them together. Hank stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at the gun, then at the photograph. Claire had known. She had known exactly what he would think of doing in this moment. She had written her message for this precise scenario, for the moment when Hank would reach for violence because it was the only language he had ever been fluent in. And she had asked him to find another way. "Protection, not violence," Hank said aloud. The words tasted strange, unfamiliar, like a food from a country he had never visited. He picked up the gun, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, put everything in the glove compartment, and locked it. From his pocket, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through the contacts until he found a name he had not called in 5 years. A man who had once been his friend before the darkness swallowed everything. A police detective who had tried years ago to pull Hank back from the edge. Detective Frank Harding. Hank's finger hovered over the name. Calling him meant no going back. It meant choosing the legal path, the slow path, the uncertain path. It meant trusting a system he had spent his whole life working outside of. He thought of Rose's face, her quiet voice, the way she said Uncle Hank like it was the safest word she knew. He thought of Claire's faith, faith he had not earned but would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. He pressed call. The phone rang 3 times. Harding. "Hey, Frank. It is Hank Dawson." A long pause. "Ridge, it has been 5 years. Hank," he corrected firmly. "I am Hank now." Another pause. "Okay. Hank, what can I do for you?" Hank took a deep breath. He looked at the photograph in his hand, at Claire's message, at her belief in him. "I need your help," Hank said. "There is a little girl who needs protection. My niece, and I want to do this right. I want to do this the right way." The words came out raw and rough, but they came out. And as he began explaining the situation to his old friend, Hank felt something shift inside him. A door opening where a wall had been, a path appearing where he had seen only darkness. He would get Rose back. Not as Ridge the feared biker, not with violence and blood and the old terrible certainty of a man with nothing to lose, but as Hank, as an uncle, as the man his sister had always believed he could be. The police station buzzed with fluorescent light and the low hum of activity. Hank sat in a visitor's chair in Detective Harding's office, his large frame making the furniture look like it belonged in a dollhouse. He had removed his leather vest. He wore a plain gray t-shirt. The gun was locked in the glove box of his truck, and he had no intention of retrieving it. Detective Frank Harding was a solid man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair in the tired eyes of someone who had spent 2 decades staring into the worst of human behavior. He studied Hank across his desk with an expression that mixed professional caution with the faint residue of an old friendship. "When you called, I figured it had to be serious," Harding said. "You were never a fan of police stations." "Things change," Hank said. "People change. So tell me about this niece of yours." Hank laid out everything. The photograph, Rose's appearance in the storm, Claire's death, Garrett Nolan, the abuse, the hidden message, Sandra Collins at social services, the men at the park, Garrett at his door, the kidnapping. He placed Claire's notebook on the desk, the small journal filled with dates and details of every instance of abuse. Sandra had given it to him, and he had carried it like a talisman. Harding flipped through the pages. His expression darkened with each one. "This is solid documentation," he said finally. "Your sister was building a case." "She ran out of time," Hank said. Harding closed the notebook. "Combined with police reports from other jurisdictions, which I am certain exist, this gives us enough to move." He looked at Hank directly. "This is the right way, Hank, the legal way." "I know," Hank said quietly. "That is why I am here." Within the hour, a team had assembled in the conference room. Officers, a child services liaison, a tactical coordinator. Maps spread across a long table. Laptops open, phone lines humming. Hank stood slightly apart, still feeling like a fish out of water among the uniforms and badges. But he stayed. For Rose. For Claire. For the man he was trying to become. Cell tower data placed Garrett Nolan's phone near a cabin property registered to his grandfather. Remote. Mountain. Limited road access. No neighbors. That is where he would take her, Hank said, pointing to the area on the map. "It is isolated. He would feel safe there." Harding nodded. "We are getting a search warrant now. Emergency custody order is in process." A tactical officer plotted approach routes. Single-story structure. 2 exits, dense tree cover. They would move at night. Full darkness. Quiet approach. Lieutenant Grayson, a tall man with a military bearing, addressed the room. "We move at 2200 hours. That gives our units time to get in position." Harding pulled Hank aside as the briefing ended. "You can come to the staging area, but you stay with me and follow every order exactly. One step out of line and I will cuff you until it is over." Hank blinked. "You are letting me come. If I do not, you will follow us anyway." Besides, Harding's expression softened. "When we get her out, she will need a familiar face." Hank felt his throat tighten. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. This could still go sideways." Harding handed him a bulletproof vest. "Put this on before we leave." Hank fastened the unfamiliar weight across his chest. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, Rose was waiting. And this time he would not fail her. The night wrapped the forest in total darkness, broken only by slivers of moonlight filtering through a canopy of pine and spruce. Hank crouched behind a patrol car parked 100 yards from the cabin, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen mountain air. The bulletproof vest was tight across his chest, unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Everything about this was unfamiliar. Working with police instead of against them. Following orders instead of giving them. Trusting the system instead of his fists. Detective Harding knelt beside him, a radio crackling softly in his hand as tactical teams confirmed their positions around the property. Through the trees, Hank could see the cabin. A low, dark structure with a single light glowing from one window, casting a pale yellow square on the snow outside. Smoke rose from a chimney into the black sky. Somewhere inside that cabin, Rose was waiting. "Everyone is in place," Harding whispered. No movement detected inside. Single vehicle in the driveway. Hank nodded. His heart hammered against the vest. Not from fear for himself. He had long ago burned through whatever store of self-preservation most men carried. The fear was for the child, for what she might be going through, for what she might be feeling alone in the dark with a man she feared. "Remember," Harding said, watching his face, "you follow my lead. Stay behind me. Do not engage unless I say, understood." They moved through the shadows, each step deliberate and silent. 4 officers flanked them in a diamond formation, weapons lowered but ready. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots, the sounds swallowed by the wind moving through the trees. As they neared the cabin, Hank noticed details that sharpened the ache in his chest. A small bicycle leaning against the porch railing, pink with training wheels and streamers on the handlebars. It was not Rose's. It was a prop. something Garrett had bought to make the cabin look like a home, to create the appearance of normalcy for anyone who might come looking. The sight of it filled Hank with a cold, focused rage that he held carefully like a blade in a sheath. Harding signaled a halt 20 feet from the front porch. The tactical team fanned out, covering the rear exit and the windows. A woman's voice crackled on the radio. Perimeter secure. Back exit covered. Harding stepped forward into the clearing. His voice was firm but controlled. "Garrett Nolan, this is Detective Harding, State Police. We need to speak with you. Come out with your hands where we can see them." Silence answered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine sap. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. Then the porch light flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the clearing. The front door opened slowly, and Garrett Nolan stood in the frame. He was calm. That was what struck Hank first. Not the kind of calm that comes from innocence, but the kind that comes from calculation. Garrett leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, his posture relaxed, his expression one of mild curiosity, as if police officers appearing at his cabin in the middle of the night was a minor inconvenience rather than the end of everything he had been running toward. "Can I help you, officers?" Garrett asked. His voice carried the same smooth, practiced warmth that Hank remembered from the hallway outside his apartment. A salesman's voice. A liar's voice. "We are here for," Rose Harding stated. "We know she is inside." "My daughter is asleep," Garrett said, shifting his weight slightly. "What business do you have disturbing us this late? A father spending time with his child in his own family's cabin is hardly a crime." Hank felt the rage pulse behind his eyes. He clenched his jaw until the muscles ached and forced himself to stay still. "Mr. Nolan," Harding continued, his voice hardening, "we have a warrant for your arrest. We have documentation of domestic violence against Claire Dawson. We have testimony from social services. And we have an emergency custody order for the child." This is not a negotiation. Garrett's mask slipped, just for a moment. Behind the pleasant smile, behind the easy charm, Hank saw something raw and desperate. A cornered animal calculating its options. Then Garrett's gaze moved past Harding and found Hank in the shadows. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by a hatred so pure it seemed to darken the air between them. "You," Garrett said. The word dripped with contempt. The biker trash Claire never stopped talking about. Hank stepped forward. His voice was steady, quieter than he expected. "Let her go, Garrett. It is over." Garrett laughed, a hollow echoing sound that bounced off the trees and came back wrong. "Over? You have no idea what you are talking about. Rose belongs with me. The courts will see it that way." "Not with your record," Harding interjected. "Not with the restraining order Claire filed. Not with the evidence we have." "Lies," Garrett spat. "All lies from a dead woman who could not handle being in a real relationship." Hank felt something surge inside him, hot and dark and terribly familiar. The old violence, the ridge inside him straining against its chains. He could cross the distance between them in 3 steps. Could put his hands on this man and end the threat permanently. He had done it before. In parking lots, in alleys, in dark rooms where no one was watching. Then a small voice came from inside the cabin. Uncle Hank Rose appeared in the doorway behind Garrett. She was wearing the same clothes she had been kidnapped in, wrinkled and dirty now. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed. She clutched a stuffed animal against her chest. The sight of her hit Hank like a physical blow. Every protective instinct in his body fired at once. Garrett spun around and grabbed Rose's arm. "Get back inside," he ordered, his voice losing all pretense of warmth. Rose whimpered. His fingers dug into her small bicep, and Hank could see the way her face crumpled with pain. The violence rose in him like a tide. Every cell in his body screamed for him to cross those 20 feet and tear Garrett Nolan apart with his bare hands. His muscles coiled, his vision narrowed. He could feel the transformation happening, feel Ridge clawing his way to the surface, demanding to be set loose. But then Rose's eyes found his. Through the fear, through the pain, through the chaos of flashing lights and shouting officers, she looked directly at him. And in her gaze, Hank saw something that stopped him cold. Trust. She was watching to see what he would do, waiting to learn what kind of man her uncle really was. Whether the world solved its problems with violence or with something else. Whether the cycle that had defined her short life would continue or break. Claire's words burned through his mind one final time. Protection, not violence, if we home. Show her there is another way. Hank unclenched his fists, slowly, deliberately. He raised his hands, palms open, and took one careful step forward. Garrett, he said. His voice was quiet, yet controlled. The rage was still there, burning white-hot behind his ribs, but he held it, contained it, refused to let it dictate what happened next. Let her go. Do not make this worse for yourself. Look around you. For the first time, Garrett seemed to register the full scope of what surrounded him. Officers emerging from the tree line, tactical positions covered, lights from multiple vehicles cutting through the darkness. There was no escape route, no angle to play, no charm that would talk his way out of this clearing. Garrett's eyes darted from one officer to another. Hank could see the calculation happening behind those flat eyes. The desperate search for leverage, for an exit, for anything that would shift the balance back in his favor. Last chance, Harding said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Release the child and come out with your hands visible. Garrett looked down at Rose. The girl trembled in his grip, her small body rigid with fear. Then he looked at Hank, standing in the clearing with his hands open and his eyes steady. Something in that steadiness, in that refusal to match violence with violence, seemed to break through whatever wall Garrett had built around himself. Not guilt. Hank did not believe the man was capable of that, but perhaps recognition that the game was over, that all the cards had been played and the hand was lost. Garrett's grip loosened. Rose pulled free and ran. She bolted down the porch steps, her small feet slipping on the frozen wood, and sprinted across the clearing toward the only safety she knew. Hank dropped to one knee and opened his arms. She hit him at full speed, her small body colliding with his chest with a force that seemed impossible for someone who weighed less than a bag of groceries. Her arms wrapped around his neck with a grip that was fierce and desperate and absolute. She pressed her face into the crook of his shoulder and sobbed. Not the quiet, contained crying of a child who had learned to be silent, but deep, shuddering, full-body sobs that shook through both of them like an earthquake. I knew you would come, she whispered between gasps. I knew it. I told him you would come, but he said you were not coming. He said nobody was coming. But I knew. Mommy said you would always come. Hank held her. He held her with both arms, his hands spread wide across her small back, his chin resting on top of her head, and he felt her heartbeat against his chest. Rapid and desperate and alive. He closed his eyes and let the world narrow to this single point. This child, this moment, the weight of her in his arms, and the fierce, overwhelming knowledge that she was safe. I will always come for you, he said. His voice broke on every word. He did not try to fix it. Always, no matter what, no matter where you are, I will always come. Behind them, the world continued to move. Garrett shouted about lawyers and rights and custody and the grave mistakes everyone was making. His voice climbed higher, stripped of all its practiced charm, revealing the raw ugliness that had always been there beneath the polished surface. Officers converged on him from all sides. Handcuffs clicked. Radio chatter filled the clearing with clipped professional language. But for Hank, none of it existed. There was only Rose. Only the fierce grip of her small arms around his neck. Only the sound of her breathing, slowly steadying against his shoulder. Only the miracle of holding something precious that he had thought was lost forever. He stood with her in his arms, and she did not let go. Her legs wrapped around his waist, and her face stayed buried against his neck. Hank carried her through the clearing toward the waiting vehicles, past the tactical officers lowering their weapons, past the flashing lights painting the snow red and blue, past the shattered front door of what had been Garrett Nolan's last stronghold. Harding fell into step beside them. His face showed something Hank had never seen in a police officer's expression before. Not just professional satisfaction, something personal, something deeply human. We have got him, Harding said quietly. Between the kidnapping charges, the assault, the financial evidence we found in the cabin, and your sister's documentation, he is going away for a very long time. It is over. Hank nodded but did not speak. He was listening to Rose's breathing, feeling it slow from ragged sobs to shuddering hiccups to the deep, exhausted rhythm of a child who had finally completely, utterly let go of the terror she had been carrying. An EMT approached with a thermal blanket and asked to check Rose for injuries. Hank set her down gently on the tailgate of an ambulance, but she kept one hand locked around his finger, and he did not pull away. The EMT was a young woman with kind eyes who checked Rose's pupils, her temperature, the bruises forming on her arm where Garrett had gripped her. She is dehydrated and cold, the EMT said. Some bruising, but nothing broken. I would recommend a full checkup at the hospital. Whatever she needs, Hank said firmly. Whatever it takes. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Rose sat in the back of Harding's unmarked car, buckled in beside Hank, her head resting against his arm. Halfway there, her hand found his in the darkness, and their fingers interlaced. His scarred and tattooed and rough with decades of hard living. Hers impossibly small and soft and unmarked by the world. Two hands that told completely different stories. But together they made a kind of sense that neither made alone. Rose fell asleep before they reached the hospital, her breathing slow and deep, her grip on Hank's hand never loosening even in sleep. He carried her inside, and the nurses took over with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen frightened children before, and knew exactly what to do. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, painting warm rectangles on the white floor. Hank sat in a plastic chair beside Rose's bed, his large frame cramped in the small seat, his elbows on his knees watching her color in a picture book that a nurse had brought. She had been at it for 20 minutes, carefully staying inside the lines, choosing colors, with the kind of deliberation that might have been funny under different circumstances. The doctors had insisted on keeping her overnight. A few bruises on her arm where Garrett had grabbed her, mild dehydration, the emotional toll of 2 days with a man she feared. They had used words like observation and precautionary that Hank had nodded along to without really hearing. His entire attention was on the child. He had refused treatment for his own injuries until they had examined Rose first. Only then had he allowed a nurse to clean and bandage the gash above his eyebrow, and even that he had insisted on having done in the same room so Rose could see him and know he had not left. Look, Rose said, holding up her coloring book. I made the sky purple. Hank leaned forward and studied the page. A house, a tree, two figures standing in front of them, one tall and one small. The sky above them was a deep, vivid purple that no meteorologist would recognize. It is beautiful, he said. Creative. She nodded seriously and returned to her work. Hank watched her, still marveling at the resilience of children. She had been through things that would break most adults, and here she was, coloring a purple sky in a hospital bed, her tongue poking between her lips in concentration. A knock at the door. Harding stood in the frame, his tie loosened, his eyes circled with the dark rings of a sleepless night. Morning. How is our girl? Hank glanced at Rose, who looked up briefly, offered the detective a small wave, and went back to her crayons. Doctors say she is doing well, physically. Harding stepped inside and kept his voice low. Nolan is being processed. Between the domestic violence records your sister kept, the testimony from social services, and the evidence we found at his cabin, including financial documents that confirm the money laundering he is looking at, serious time. Federal charges on top of the state ones. Good, Hank said. The word was simple and final. There is more, Harding continued. We found a locked safe at the cabin. Inside were records that match what your sister documented. Claire had been copying his financial files for years. She was not just running from him, she was building a case against him. She just did not live long enough to use it. Hank looked at the photograph of himself that now rested on the bedside table. Rose had asked for it the moment she arrived at the hospital. Claire had been braver than he had ever given her credit for. Braver than he had ever been. We will need statements from both of you eventually, Harding said. But there is no rush. And the child welfare people will want to discuss the future. Her future, Hank said. Harding studied him for a moment. You know, when I first met you, I figured you for nothing but trouble. You were not wrong. That was me for a long time, maybe. But that is not who I saw last night. Harding placed a business card on the table. Call me when you are ready. There is paperwork for temporary guardianship we can get started on. Hank's head came up. Guardianship. Harding allowed himself a small smile. You are her uncle. Her mother documented her wishes clearly. With Nolan's situation and the evidence on record, you have a strong case. He looked at Rose, who was now drawing something new on a blank page. Plus, I have seen how she looks at you. That counts for something in court, whether it should or not. After Harding left, a nurse came in with discharge paperwork and a list of instructions. Follow-up appointments. Dietary recommendations. The suggestion of counseling for Rose to help her process the trauma. Whatever she needs, Hank said without hesitation. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. The nurse smiled, the kind of smile healthcare workers give when they see someone doing right by a child. She will be just fine, she said. Kids are tougher than we think, especially when they have someone solid to lean on. When they were alone again, Rose closed her coloring book and looked at Hank. Her expression had shifted from absorbed concentration to something more serious, more searching. Are we going home now? She asked. Hank paused. Home. The word meant his cramped apartment with its bare walls and broken chairs and cabinet full of nothing. A place designed for a man who expected nothing from life and received exactly that. Not a home, a hiding place? Yes, he said. But we might need to find a new home soon. A better one. With a room just for you. Rose considered this. Her fingers traced the edge of her coloring book. What kind of room? What kind do you want? She thought about it with the grave deliberation of someone making a decision that would affect the rest of her life. Purple walls, she said finally, and a bookshelf, and a window where I can see birds. Hank felt something crack open inside his chest. Not breaking, not the kind of crack that destroys, the kind that lets light in, the kind that happens when something too long compressed finally finds room to breathe. Purple walls and a bookshelf and birds, he repeated. I think we can manage that. Rose looked at him. Really, really. She studied his face in that way she had, searching for the truth behind the words. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she nodded once decisively and said, okay, then more hesitantly, can I still call you Uncle Hank? Hank moved from the chair to the edge of her bed. He took her small hand in his rough one. The contrast was absolute. Her fingers were soft and pale and impossibly tiny. His were scarred and calloused and darkened with old tattoos. But they fit together. Somehow impossibly they fit. You can call me whatever you want, kiddo, he said. His voice was rough, uneven. He did not try to smooth it. I will always answer. Rose smiled, a real smile, the kind that started in her eyes and spread across her whole face like sunrise coming over a mountain. She had her mother's smile, Hank realized. The exact same smile. She held out her arms, and Hank gathered her gently against his chest. Her small heart beat against his quick and light, and he could feel the absolute trust in the way she relaxed against him. No tension, no fear, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. He held her carefully as if she were made of something precious and irreplaceable, because she was. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most beautiful of Hank Dawson's life. First came the paperwork, mountains of it. Hank filed for temporary guardianship with the help of a legal aid attorney that Harding had connected him with. A woman named Rebecca Strand, who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and spoke about family law the way a general speaks about battle strategy. She was thorough, precise, and she did not blink when she saw Hank's criminal record. We have a strong case, Rebecca told him across her cluttered desk. Your sister's wishes are documented. The father is facing federal charges. Social Services supports the placement. Every person who interacted with Claire in her final years will testify on your behalf. And my record? Hank asked. The words tasted like ash. Rebecca removed her glasses and looked at him directly. Your record is not ideal, but it is also in the past. What matters now is what the court sees today. A man who answered when his niece needed him. A man who chose the legal path when violence would have been easier. A man who is showing up every single day. She paused. That matters, Mr. Dawson, more than you know. The temporary guardianship was granted within 10 days. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of eyes that had seen every permutation of human failure, reviewed the evidence and the testimony and looked at Hank for a long time before speaking. Mr. Dawson, she said, the court recognizes that you are not a conventional guardian. But the law does not require perfection. It requires commitment, stability, and the genuine welfare of the child. Based on the evidence presented and on the documented wishes of Claire Dawson, this court grants temporary guardianship of the minor Roseanne Dawson to her uncle Hank Dawson, pending the permanent custody hearing. Hank stood in the courtroom and felt the words settle into him like anchors. Beside him, Rose sat in a chair that was too big for her, swinging her legs, clutching the photograph in both hands. She had insisted on being there, had put on her best dress, the one with small white flowers, and had brushed her own hair with fierce concentration that morning. After the hearing, they stood on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sun. Rose looked up at him. "Does that mean I can stay?" she asked. "That means you can stay," Hank said. His voice was rough but steady. Rose nodded satisfied and reached for his hand. They found a new apartment on the quieter side of town, a modest two-bedroom on the first floor of a building with a landlord who fixed things when they broke and a small yard bordered by a wooden fence. The windows faced east, where the morning sun poured in like something golden and liquid. Hank installed a bird feeder on the second day, and within a week the yard was busy with sparrows and finches and one bold blue jay that Rose named Captain. Rose chose the paint color for her room herself, a deep, rich purple that the hardware store clerk called Regal Plum. Hank spent an entire Saturday painting the walls, while Rose sat in the doorway and supervised, offering detailed critiques of his technique. "You missed a spot. We're there, by the window." "See, he saw. He fixed it." She approved. They fell into a rhythm that surprised Hank with its steadiness. Morning started with breakfast at the kitchen table, a real kitchen table with four matching chairs that Hank had bought new from a furniture store where the saleswoman had looked at him with undisguised suspicion until Rose tugged on her sleeve and asked if the purple chair was available. It was not, but the saleswoman found them a set with blue cushions that Rose declared acceptable. Pancakes on weekdays, waffles on weekends. Blueberries always, because Rose liked them and because they were the first thing she had ever asked him for, and Hank had made a private vow to never run out. He learned to braid her hair by watching a video on his phone, his thick fingers clumsy with the small strands, at first improving gradually through pure repetition and Rose's patient instruction. "A little tighter on the left side, Uncle Hank." "No, the other left." He learned which cartoons she liked and which ones scared her. He learned that she would eat almost anything except mushrooms, which she regarded with deep moral suspicion. He learned that she needed exactly 7 minutes of quiet time after waking up before she was ready to interact with the world, and that those 7 minutes were sacred and inviolable. He learned that bedtime stories were non-negotiable, and that the brave knight had become a recurring character whose adventures grew more elaborate with each telling. The knight now had a horse named Thunder, and a castle in the mountains, and a best friend who was a talking owl. Rose contributed plot points freely, and Hank found himself looking forward to the stories almost as much as she did. Hank enrolled her in preschool at the recommendation of the child welfare caseworker. The first day, Rose held his hands so tight in the parking lot that his fingers went white. She looked up at him with those serious eyes. "What if they do not like me?" she asked. Hank knelt down to her level. The asphalt was cold beneath his knee, and the morning sun was warm on his back, and the world felt very large around this very small girl. "Then they are missing out," he said, "because you are the best person I know." Rose considered this. "That is what Mommy said too. Your mom was a smart lady." Rose nodded. "She was the smartest." "I will be right here when school is over," Hank said, "standing in this exact spot. Promise, promise." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she let go of his hand and walked through the door. She did not look back. And Hank understood that her not looking back was the greatest act of trust she could offer. She believed he would be there. She did not need to check. He was there, every day. Standing in the parking lot 10 minutes early, scanning for the purple coat he had bought her, the one with the warm lining and the good zipper, and the hood that she always forgot to put up even in the rain. The counselor recommended by the hospital saw Rose twice a week. Hank attended some sessions too, sitting in a chair that was too small for him, in an office decorated with soft colors and gentle artwork, learning about trauma responses in children and how to create what the counselor called a secure base. The concept was simple beneath the clinical language. Be present, be consistent, be the thing that does not change when everything else is changing. Hank could do that. He had been doing it his whole life just for the wrong things. Now he would do it for the right one. One evening after dinner and dishes and a bath that involved more water on the floor than in the tub, Rose asked Hank to tell her a bedtime story. Once upon a time, he began sitting on the edge of her bed in the purple room. There was a brave knight. Was she pretty? Rose asked, just as she had the first time. The prettiest, Hank said, and the smartest, and the bravest person in the whole kingdom. Like Mommy, like your mom. Hank agreed, his throat tightened, but he kept going. This brave knight had a little princess to protect, and she knew the world could be scary sometimes. But she also knew that being brave did not mean not being scared. It meant being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Rose listened with heavy eyes, fighting sleep to hear the end. What happened to the night? She found someone to help her, Hank said slowly, someone she trusted. And together they built a castle with purple walls and a bookshelf and a window where they could watch the birds every morning. Rose smiled. That sounds nice. It is nice, Hank said. It is the nicest castle in the whole kingdom. Her eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. The photograph of Hank and Claire sat on her nightstand propped against a small lamp visible from her pillow. She had asked for it to be there so she could see it when she woke up. Hank sat in the dim light of the purple room and listened to his niece breathe. Outside, the first stars appeared in the evening sky, the same stars that had watched over him and Claire when they were children. The same stars that had seen him fail and fall and lose his way for so many years. But stars did not judge. They just shone, constant and distant and enduring. Hank thought about Claire, about the faith she had carried for him through all those years of silence, about the message she had written in invisible ink on the back of a photograph, knowing that someday he would need to read it, knowing that someday he would be standing at the crossroads between who he had been and who he could become. She had been right about him. He had not believed it at first, had resisted it, had nearly chosen the old way, the violent way, the way that would have proven everyone else's assumptions correct. But in the end, he had chosen differently. Not because he was naturally good, not because violence did not tempt him, but because a 4-year-old girl was watching and what she saw would shape who she became. That was the real inheritance Claire had left him. Not just Rose, but the responsibility to be the kind of person worth inheriting. The kind of person who proved through daily acts of patience and presence and imperfect love that people could change. That darkness did not have to be permanent. That the mistakes of the past did not have to become the destiny of the future. Hank reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Rose's forehead. She stirred but did not wake. Her small hand rested on the blanket palm up, fingers curled slightly inward. He placed his hand next to hers. The contrast was stark. His scarred, tattooed, weather-beaten hand beside her smooth, unmarked, impossibly small one. Two hands that had no business belonging to the same family. And yet here they were. "Good night, Rose," Hank whispered. He stood and walked to the doorway, pausing to look back at the room. Purple walls, a bookshelf filled with picture books they had chosen together at the local shop, a window where a bird feeder swayed gently in the evening breeze, a teddy bear with one eye tucked under the covers, a photograph of two people who had once believed in each other propped against a lamp. Hank pulled the door most of the way closed, leaving a gap so the hallway light could reach her bed. She had never asked him to do this. He just knew. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter looking at the refrigerator door. Covered in drawings, purple skies and stick figures and houses with smoke coming from the chimneys and two people always standing together, big one and little one, Uncle Hank and Rose. He had not had a drink in 3 weeks, had not thought about the club in 2, had not felt the pull of the road, the old restless urge to keep moving to outrun whatever was chasing him. Because for the first time in his life, there was nowhere else he wanted to be. The temporary guardianship had been approved. The permanent custody hearing was scheduled for next month. Harding had told him the outcome was all but certain. Claire's wishes were clear. Garrett's crimes were documented. And every caseworker and counselor and teacher who had interacted with Hank and Rose in the past weeks had written the same thing in their reports. Stable, present, devoted. Words no one had ever used to describe Hank Dawson before. He finished his water and rinsed the glass and set it in the drying rack beside Rose's small cup, the purple one with butterflies that she had chosen at the store. 2 cups, side by side, a man's and a child's, simple and ordinary, and to Hank the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He turned off the kitchen light and moved through the quiet apartment. At the hallway, he paused. Through the gap in Rose's door, he could see her sleeping form, the slow rise and fall of her breathing, the soft glow of the nightlight, casting gentle shadows on the purple walls. "Claire," he said softly, addressing not the room, but something larger, something he did not have a name for. "I am trying. Every day I am trying." He imagined he could hear her voice. Not words exactly, but a feeling. A warmth. The same warmth he had felt as a boy when his sister would slip her hand into his and say, "You will keep me safe, right, Jackie?" Right, he whispered. Always. Hank walked to his own room, but before going inside, he did something he had started doing without planning to. He knelt down and looked under his bed. No monsters, he reported quietly to the empty hallway. Then he opened the closet and checked inside. All clear. He did not know when this had become a habit. He did not know why he did it when Rose could not see or hear him. But it felt right. It felt necessary. As if by performing this small ritual every night, he was keeping a promise that went beyond Rose, beyond Claire, beyond the walls of this apartment. A promise to the darkness itself that it was not welcome here, that this place was claimed, guarded, protected. He climbed into bed and lay on his back staring at the ceiling. The photograph of him and Claire was in his wallet on the nightstand. He did not need to look at it anymore. The words were written on his heart now, as indelible as any tattoo. I believe in who you are, not what you have done. Hank closed his eyes. Outside, the stars shone. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called and was answered. The world turned on its axis, carrying them all forward into whatever came next. In her purple room, Rose slept deeply, her breathing steady, her face peaceful. The photograph of her mother and her uncle stood on the nightstand, catching the soft light. And somewhere in that space between dreaming and waking, the little girl smiled. She was home.